Okay. Welcome back to Did You Know, exclusively on Volt 104.3 FM. Tonight we are going back in time. We're going as far back as the 18th century. We are going way back to 1818 in the Talbot County of Maryland. Yes, Frederick Douglass is born into the worst business model in human history, which is slavery, basically. Yes. He has no assets, no rights, not even knowledge of his own birthday, basically. But, from his earliest memories, young Frederick understood something most people miss, which is the importance of knowledge, basically. Yes. And Frederick understood something most people miss, which is knowledge is the ultimate competitive advantage. Now, in 1826, 8-year-old Frederick is sent to Baltimore to live in Hugh and Sophia All's house. This is where everything changes for him because being born as a black American living in America, from parents who hail all the way from Africa, he was born into slavery, and basically you live in a situation where you do not control your movement, you do not control your life choices, you do not control what you're exposed to. You're just like a property. We talked about this last week when we looked into the life of Jaja of Opobo, talking about how he was captured from his village in Imo State and sold into slavery in Bonny, how he bought his freedom, how he moved from being a paddler to a trader to a canoe house king and stuff. So we covered a lot last week, and this week we are looking at Frederick Douglass. And in 1826, like I just said a couple of minutes ago, he was sent to live with Hugh and Sophia Auld, right? And this is where everything changed for him because Sophia Auld picks up an interest in him and the young slaves in her house. Basically, she had like 4 or 5 slaves living as children with her, amongst other slaves in her estate, basically. And so she started teaching him and a couple other slaves the alphabet. But when her husband found out, he shut it down immediately with one line that would puzzle his life for a couple of years to come. He said something that struck Frederick in his early years, and the line was so vivid that he captured it in his autobiography. He said that learning would spoil the best slave in the world. Frederick wasn't discouraged when he made that statement because he said in another encounter that from that moment I understood the pathway from slavery to freedom, right? Hugh Hall revealed that you shouldn't teach a black American slave to read and write. Why? Because you would change their perspective on life. He also went forward to say in that statement that he said, no matter what you do, don't let the slave read the Bible because it will expand their world. And secondly, from that encounter being yelled at by Huge Old, Frederick set an intention in his heart to go and find a way to learn how to read and how to write. So, from a business perspective, Hugh Old had just reviewed the entire game. He didn't know that Frederick was paying attention, right? He had shown Frederick exactly what the system feared. The system feared that the one thing that could differentiate a slave from a free man was the knowledge gap, the literacy gap. So young Frederick decides to start learning a way to read and write for himself. Now, at the point this is happening, he doesn't know his date of birth, right? It wasn't recorded anywhere. His date of birth wasn't recorded anywhere. So he doesn't know how old he was, but he was pretty young, and the mistress of the house was the one teaching them how to read and write, and her husband shut that move down. So guess what he did? He turned to trading bread for reading. So he would serve in the upper house where his master resided, and then he would pick crumbs of food left over on the table, and he would go and trade it with young white kids in America for them to teach him how to read and write, basically. So, to put things in perspective for you right now, back then in America, you had the white, the Americans, the rich. In this context, they call them the white Americans, basically. You have the African Americans, who are the slaves. They now have what some people call, in their own language, white trash, which is poor white people who can't afford to feed themselves. So they work as servants to rich farmers who own land, and then they are put as overseers over the slaves in that ecosystem. So they are actually poor, and they feed off whatever they are paid from the master of the farm, and then their children are actually moving around, having playing and having fun, and most of them have to go hungry because they've not yet, their parents haven't yet been paid, and so they are idling about. And so Frederick Douglass is actually taking time out of, from the scraps he's picking up from the table, he's selling these things, trading them for lessons on how to read the alphabet, how to read words. And whenever he's serving in the main house and he sees scraps of newspapers, he started cutting and clipping those scraps of newspapers and putting it under his pillow in his house back at the slave quarters. And then at night, he would burn the midnight oil to read those papers and try to make a headway out of them. So he also studied timbers in the shipyard, right? Copying letters, and he found a book in the shipyard called the Columbian Orator, and he starts reading this book months after learning how to write and how to read, basically. So he wasn't just reading this book to read, he was also reading this book to argue, to persuade, and to win minds. And the first lesson in this story actually begins by identifying what the market doesn't want you to have, right? And then acquire it at any cost, basically. So at this point in time, living in slavery, the market didn't want any slave to know how to read and how to write. And so what did he do? He made it his choice to go learn how to read and write, and then acquire that skill, basically, because that skill in that particular point in time is the gap between where he is right now and where he wants to go. And so in acquiring that skill, he put himself in a very good position to chase a life of freedom, basically. But knowledge wasn't just enough, because knowledge without action is just theory. And in 1833, Frederick is sent to Edward Covey, a slave breaker, hired to crush rebellious spirits. For 6 months, Covey beats him regularly. Frederick's wounds barely have time to heal, and this was his rock bottom in his life's journey. If you would call it a failure moment, because his rebellious spirit and freedom, how would I put it now? His rebellious spirit, because he's searching for a way to get free and excel himself and move up the social ladder. We'll call it social mobility. We covered this a couple of weeks ago. And so that spirit led to him having a lot of fracas with his boss, and then he was sent to a slave breaker. A slave breaker back then was somebody you sent to your most stubborn slaves. They would torture, beat them up, do a lot of things to kind of make the person mellow, basically. And then they would now send the boy or the slave backwards after he had been broken, basically. However, in August 1833, after another brutal beating, this time Frederick does something revolutionary. He starts fighting back. For nearly 2 hours, they wrestle, and Frederick finally wins. Shockingly, after winning that bout, Covey never touches him again in that space. Covey never lifts a finger against him or tries to beat him up or something again. And Frederick Douglass later writes saying, "You have seen how a man was made a slave, right? Now you see how a slave was made a man." This was his speech speaking about that point in time where he was sent to the slave breaker's house. And then this is where we'll go into the second business lesson for today, which is there comes a moment when you must fight for your worth, when you must refuse to accept terms that devalue your value. Okay. So he fought for his worth and he gained a little bit of respite, basically. But like all stories continue, fighting back wasn't enough. Frederick knew that as long as he remained in Maryland, his ceiling was fixed and he needed to change markets entirely. So on September the 3rd, 1838, Frederick took out his boldest decision yet. He disguised himself as a sailor and borrows identity papers, boards a northbound train, and leaves Maryland basically. So he disguises himself, picks somebody's documents, and boards a train going north in America. If you didn't know, well, did you know that in America, slavery was predominantly in the southern parts of America? Talking about the Texas and other states in the southern parts of America. But in the northern part of America, actually, slavery was abolished earlier, and slaves were actually running sometimes all through the night to get to northern part of America because they knew that they would get their freedom. And so in Frederick's case, he decided to disguise himself as a sailor, steal somebody's identity papers, and board a train going to Washington. Now, when the conductor asked for his papers, Frederick stays calm and replied, "I never carry my free papers to sea with me, but I will have a paper with the American eagle on it. On that, I will carry with me around." So he replied that he didn't carry his freedom papers, but he carries a paper with the American eagle, which he uses around the world. So he didn't just, improvise. He exuded confidence in that encounter, but he also took a calculated risk. And within 24 hours, he's in New York City, a free man in a new market. There's a reason why I'm going this route, because we are going to pick a lot of things out of this story today. And we're going to be looking at how you can apply some of the things that he did at that point in time to your business, to your life, and, to all your ventures, basically. So Frederick doesn't just celebrate his freedom once he gets to New York, he immediately starts building his network, right? In New York, he marries Anna Murray, a free black woman who helped finance his escape, and they move to New Bedford in Massachusetts. And he changes his name to Frederick Douglass, rebranding basically. He's left Bailey behind, the name tied to slavery, and he adopted Douglas as his new identity, a new brand for a new market. So sometimes you need to rebrand completely to match your new reality and audience. But there's more in this story. Frederick is finally free, albeit he's broke, and he works as a laborer, sawing wood, shoveling coal, and sweeping chimneys. White sheep caulkers refuse to work alongside black caulkers, so despite his skills, he takes whatever job opportunities are available where he finds it. But it's at this point in time he started discovering his core product, which is his story. And in 1841, abolitionist meeting in Nantucket. Frederick is invited to speak about his experiences. So, this is a man who 3 years earlier was considered property. Now he stands before a crowd of white abolitionists and tells his story with such power that they are actually stunned. Some even doubt he was ever enslaved. Surely no former slave could speak so eloquently. And that doubt became his selling point and his opportunity. In 1845, he did something revolutionary, which is he published his autobiography titled The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. And on the title page, he boldly declares, written by himself. No ghostwriter, no white editor sanitizing his message, just his truth in his own words. His unique story was his unfair advantage, so he had to own it completely. The book immediately became a bestseller within 3 years. 11,000 copies were sold in America, translating in French and Dutch, as well as 9 other languages. So, just I want to take a pause and I want you to think about it from somebody who was considered property to somebody who was escaping slavery after being sent to a slave breaker, then escaping Southern America to New York, to rebranding himself, changing his name, settling down, writing a book, now turning his life story into a message. I think one of the movies you can actually use to get a clearer picture of what these people actually went through was one of those movies is Django. Another one is 12 Years a Slave. You get to see some of the things they actually went through and how they were able to come out of that particular point in time. Now, for Jaja of Opobo, it was trade that was his way out of slavery. For Frederick Douglass, his route out of slavery was a relationship from North America that funded his way out of the southern parts of America. But this story doesn't actually end here because we could have called it a wrap at this point in time. He's free, he's married, he's rebranded his name, he's now moving into speaking against slavery. But this man is actually going to go back into slavery. Into slavery. Like, his story is so touching because he actually was he bought himself out of slavery 3 times. But because he wrote an autobiography and he named his enslavers in his book, Frederick also inadvertently published a confession that he used to belong to a certain young man somewhere in Southern America and is now at risk of being captured and being returned to slavery. So what does he do? He executes a brilliant pivot, which is he goes international. He has to actually travel out of America in August of 1845, sailing to Ireland and Britain for nearly 2 years, and he stayed there and lectures in the British Isles about American slavery. Yes, so because he's made his book public and a lot of people can now read up his autobiography, there was also the threat of his captors coming back to reclaim him after claiming his freedom. And so he leaves America and goes to Britain. Not only does he escape immediate danger in America, he's expanded his reach to England, building credibility with European audiences, raising funds to purchase his legal freedom, and then he returns with capital and connections to scale his business. What can we learn from this part of the story? When your domestic market becomes hostile, you can pivot internationally. But this is just like an icing on the cake. I still have a breakdown segment coming up towards the back half of this show, where I'm going to give you the practical steps you can use. So, but this was what he did. Now, British supporters raised £150 for him to legally buy back his freedom from Hugh Auld. Some abolitionists criticized this, saying it was legitimizing slavery, but Frederick was pragmatic. He decided to operate without constantly looking over his shoulder. And so in 1847, now legally free and backed by British investors, Frederick launches his own abolitionist newspaper called the North Star. Now, that title was very important because American slaves living in Southern America actually used the North Star, Polaris, to track their way to the northern part of America. So he named his newspaper the North Star because the North Star Polaris was what they used to find their routes when they are traveling at night. And it was published from a church basement in New York. So think about this. Frederick Douglass just launched a media startup. He's now a publisher, editor, writer, and distribution manager. The paper's motto is "Truth is of no color. God is the father of us all, and we are all brethren." That's the motto of the newspaper. So it wasn't just about journalism or any other thing. This was actual brand positioning, and his target is not just black readers but or white abolitionists. His target is universal, with a universal message and broad market appeal, right? So when we come back from this very brief break, I'm going to close out the story of his rise to influence, and then we get into the most juicy part of this show, which is where we get to dissect key principles you can use today. Yes, from this character way back from the 1880s. Stick around, I'll be right back. Welcome back to Did You Know, coming to you exclusively on Volt 104.3 FM. My name is John, and if you're just joining us right now, we've been going over the story of Frederick Douglass, the black American slave who found his way through freedom and bought his way out of slavery 4 times and beyond, that over and over and over again. The first time he ran away, right? The second time he was captured, brought back as a result of his book he wrote, naming the people who were his, enslavers in his book. And then he bought his way out of slavery yet again. He was later captured again and he bought his way out of slavery. And then he ran away to Britain, bought his freedom legally, legal document, right? Started a newspaper, came back to America to champion the movement for the abolition of slave trade in America. Yes. So, if you're just joining us, that's like the precursor. And today we're also going to be looking at, principles you can glean from his life and from his story, basically. So, Frederick Douglass, at his peak of influence, was around 1852. That's when he was at his peak of influence, and he delivers a speech which is actually one of the most powerful speeches in American history right now. And the title of the speech is actually What to the Slave is the Meaning of 4th of July. What to the Slave is the 4th of July. This is one of the most powerful speeches in American history because he delivers it a day after the Independence Day in America, and he calls the July 4th independence the biggest affront on black Americans because of slavery in the 1880s. His message isn't built towards just his white audience. Neither does he soften his message. He calls the American freedom celebration a mockery of the black race in America and holds the nation accountable to its stated principle, which is that all men are created equal. But as you know, some parts of America were still practicing slavery back then. And when the Civil War broke out in 1861, Frederick is the most prominent black man in America by that time. He advises President Lincoln, recruits soldiers, and even sends two of his own sons to fight. And by the end of his life, he's held positions as the U.S. Marshal, Recorder of Deeds, Minister to Haiti, and in 1888, he receives votes for President of the United States at the Republican National Convention. Mhm. At the Republican National Convention. Yes. So from an enslaved child to presidential candidate, just like that, from an illiterate child that was not taught how to read and write, to an author, from property to power broker in American politics. That was the transformation. The transformation was actually night and day, simple. Now, having lived a full life, Frederick Douglass dies on February 20th in 1895 at the age of 77. Thousands attended his funeral. Everybody was talking about this character who was so learned, so fluent, so proficient in writing and in reading and delivering speeches that they gather around and they erect a monument in his honor. But his legacy was actually his words, his story, his business blueprints, which live on even till today. Now, in American history, he's one of the most revered black American characters that lived in the 1880s. So, that's my perfect segue into the most interesting segment of this show, which is where we're going to distill wisdom from somebody who has wisdom in spades to deliver. Somebody who has wisdom in spades, like for real. You need to read his autobiography, which is available online. Trust me, three things that will happen to you when you read his autobiography. The first thing is you will discover words you didn't know existed in the dictionary. Trust me. Trust me. And basically, one of the reasons why this is such an important thing to do, reading the biography, discovering the words that you never thought existed before, is that it's going to make you pay attention to one of the most important skills we need in the world today, which is communication skills. Yes, being able to craft a message that move the masses, being able to communicate thoughts, intention, and your message in such a way that you can appeal to millions through the medium of social media, which we talked about when we talked about the partnership age, which we are just coming out of, and about moving into the AI age, right? So let's get into the most important segment of this show, which is I'll be breaking down his blueprint. If you like, you can call it the business blueprint, because Douglas wasn't just a freedom fighter, he was a strategic operator who built lasting impact from nothing, right? And I'm breaking this into four segments, right? So that you can understand the business blueprint: mindset, method, mastery, and modern application. So the modern application side is what is going to, I think, benefit you the most, but then the mindset part too is something you need to look at. And the phone lines will be officially open from now. You can call in, but I'd rather you do that maybe after we go through one or two blueprints. Okay, so let's look into the blueprint. The first blueprint that I've been dying to talk to you about is the mindset blueprint. The question here is, what belief system allowed Frederick Douglass to achieve what he achieved? Three core mindsets, actually. The first one is that he believed freedom was something you create, not something you are given. Freedom is something you create. Now, for me, having this program with you today, the kind of freedom that is in my head is financial freedom, basically, right? Financial freedom. Another type of freedom that is in my head, basically, is location freedom. When are you, or let me rephrase it, when are you going to have financial freedom? When are you going to have the capacity to earn without tying your earning to time, basically? Yes. So it is something you create. Not so nobody's going to wake up and tell you, go and buy this stock in the market, go and buy this product, go and start this product and services. It's not something you are given, it's something you create, and that creative force is in you, basically. It's in you. So the second mindset we are going to be looking at is, and before we go into the second mindset, is that he didn't wait for excuse me, he didn't wait for his slaveholders to give him freedom, but he actually created his freedom. How? By taking action. One of the things that keeps a lot of people stranded, going around in circles, is waiting for perfect conditions. So stop waiting for perfect conditions. Stop waiting for investors to believe in you. Stop waiting for the government to fix the system. Start building anyhow, anyway. Start building, basically. Second belief he had was his belief in self-definition over external validation. This is important because one of the things we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, and I keep going back to it, is that we are living in an era, or the ending of an era, where you don't need anybody to give you validation that you can talk. Go and start a podcast. You don't need anybody's validation. The software, the solution, the avenue, everything is already set. All you need to do is partner with one of those media software solution providers and start the way you are. Start the way you are, basically. So stop waiting for validation. Define the mountain, define where you want to go into, and then key into that part of your journey. Key into it. And then the final thing when we talk about mindset is that he believed in iteration over perfection, which means he didn't just publish one book and stop. Because in my research for this show, I discovered that he wrote his autobiography not once, not twice. He wrote his autobiography 3 times, and each time he wrote it, he expounded on the principles from the last copy of his autobiography, which means that he didn't limit himself, he didn't limit his capacity. Yes, so you need to don't wait for perfection. Start where you are, start with what you have, and you can improve. Good evening, name and location, please. Hello, good evening. Okay, I think we lost that caller. Yes, so don't wait for perfection. Start where you are and start growing from where you are. Yes. So the next blueprint we are going to be looking at is the daily habits and processes that he had. Mhm. Douglas operated day to day using this success principle, which wasn't just mindset, it was a method. He invested obsessively in skill acquisition. So remember how I told you he was serving in the main house, and then he would actually go about picking scraps from the table of scraps of food to sell to the white kids in the neighborhood who were poor. And then they would in turn teach him how to read and write. And then he would go around the big house, and then he would scrunch for scraps of paper and newspapers, and then he would study that at night when everybody was fast asleep. So you need to look out for the skill sets, look out for the skill gaps you have, and then itemize what those skill gaps are and how you can set about acquiring them. Yes, so in your business, in your craft, in your journey as a creative, what skill are you acquiring right now that will be your competitive advantage in the coming years? One of them should be figuring out how to utilize AI in whatever you're doing. So yes, whether it's digital marketing, financial analysis, public speaking, or coding, you need to start investing minutes into that daily. I'll give you one quote as we draw close to the end of this show, is that life is a body of your activities within the 24-hour blank check you have. So in a day you have 24 hours. Obviously you have 6 dedicated to rest or sleep, and you have about 18 remaining. So what you do with the remaining 18, how you fill it up. Are you filling it up with intention, or are you filling it up with just distractions? Basically, it's what you put into the hours that make the hour count. So what you can do is you can pick up a skill. If you look at your phone and you look at your screen time, your well-being, you will discover that maybe WhatsApp, or maybe YouTube, or maybe one other app, TikTok or Facebook, is consuming 3 hours of your day every day. You can cut that back and replace that with something like Coursera. You can go and learn a skill, basically. Yes, we have a call. Let me see if I can pick this call. Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Na- Name and location, please.
Yes, my name is Cecilia. I'm calling from Abuja.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for this mind-blowing information.
Thank you.
Knowledge, my
Mm,
God.
mm,
Ah, you see how it shows that in life we don't really have to wait. See,
mm-hmm,
no, Douglas was able to move even in a tight corner because, like in our world, now somebody will say, "I'm a slave." You
mm-hmm,
fold your hand and stay there. You make a move.
mm-hmm.
Now, even the person that was supposed to torture him own up the mind to fight back. That kind of spirit. Oh my
Yes.
God. And after the fighting back, he now got some freedom from that. That
Mm-hmm,
means we don't have to wait. We don't have to relax and say, this is where my parents put me. Oh.
mm-hmm.
I have to stay there. I don't have any uncle to talk to. I don't. So, this is actually a message for every one of us.
Mm.
Like the mindset, the blueprint of the mindset blueprint said, freedom you create, not something you were given. You know,
Yes.
he created it. He made a move. He took the highest route. how do I put it? Trying to move
Mm-hmm.
from where you are caged
Mm-hmm.
with another person's identity, it took the highest risks.
Yeah.
So we don't have to relax in this life. We have seen it.
No.
We have to believe in ourselves, determine over external definition.
Yes.
Just start where you are and stop waiting for validation. Your message is giving me like I don't know how to say it.
Thank
There's
you.
so
Thank you
much.
so much.
I
Thank
think
you.
we will see a whole lot. And the last one I said, we should figure out how to use AI on what we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to start making a whole lot of moves
Mm-hmm.
in our all these our crafts, pastries. I think we have to actually maybe there should be more of digging in, find out how do I fit in, so that
Yeah.
no, I am not left behind in this quest of trying to survive. Keep up the good work. We are enjoying your program.
Thank you.
People are giving us knowledge, and I say, well done. And happy new month to you. Sorry, I
Happy new
forgot
month
to
to you.
say
Yeah. Happy new month.
this month will bring good things to us.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Do have a good evening. Do have a good evening. Yes. Such a pleasure every time you call in. Yes. Thank you for calling in. Thank you for being a part of the Volt family. Yes. Special shout out to you and your family. Yes, we have another call here. Let's go. Good evening. Name and location, please.
Good evening. My name is
Welcome. 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 So, yeah. Go ahead.
um this I'm glad I came to this program today because I feel inspired. I
Uh.
listening to the history of Frederick Douglass
Mm.
was very inspiring.
Yeah.
I think almost everybody can relate to something that is happening in their daily life or something that has happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely can relate it to my present life, and it's inspiring. Giving me ideas and like I don't know how to put it, but it's making me see options that
Mm-hmm.
I have options. Giving me so if someone that was legally owned to
Mm-hmm.
someone else to
Like a piece
figure
of
out
property.
so I can.
Sure.
So thank you.
You're
Whether it's
welcome.
financial freedom, whether it's in whatever situation you are, whether it's someone abusing you,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
mentally,
Yeah.
whatever it is, I think that all it takes is for you to own up, for you to stand on your own feet and decide that today is the end, enough is enough, and I'm finding a way out of it. Because I think that, in fact, we have more opportunities than Frederick Lehman had at his time. So I think that if you really if you really get up and say that you can do better, if you want out, I think
Yeah.
you have more opportunities and you also have people backing you up.
Yeah. True
So
that. True
thank
that. You're welcome. You're welcome. Do have a wonderful evening. Thank you for calling in. Thank you for sharing. Yes. So trust me, like freedom is not something you are given, it's something you create. Like if it's financial freedom or if it's location freedom, if you want to japa, you want to go out, like trust me, it's something you create. Nobody's going to, my son, wake up, see tickets, see everything, come and japa. No, you have to just go out and create it. Sometimes the initial first move is all you need. Every other thing you need, you discover it as you keep moving, basically. There's a quote by somebody, I've forgotten his name right now. He said, you're not going to see all the steps in the staircase, but you can see the first two steps you need to take. And sometimes the first two steps you need to take is set an intention that you are going to take the step, and the next step you need to take is also be ready for disruption. Because as someone said, I'm going to quote Myron Golden now, as Myron Golden said, disruption always follows intent. If you remember from scriptures, you see that after God said let there be light and whatever, before he said that, when the spirit of the Lord was moving over the earth, he said let there be light, and guess what? He said that darkness was covering the face of the deep. So disruption follows your intention. As long as you are ready for that disruption, you are well prepared to succeed. So set the intention, be ready for the disruption to follow, and then you will get the next step as you keep moving forward. And this is where I leave you tonight. Always remember, I'll be right here waiting for you, same time next week. And if you want all the blueprints we spoke about, you're going to see it on our WhatsApp status. Have a wonderful evening.